You're probably wondering why this video about fossilization is on a channel that has to do with ancient history, ancient human history, right? Ancient human history, so far as we can kind of tell, is not billions of years old, right? It's not millions of years old, you know, depending on who you want to talk to. But fossilization is definitely a subject, if you follow the mainstream, that requires hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to happen, correct? So why are we talking about this? Well, here's the deal. Fossilization is important because as we study catastrophism in our ancient history, what we run into is we run into a lot of the ancient cultures talking about and knowing of a lot of ancient animals that are either tens of thousands of years old to millions of years old relative to what mainstream history and science puts them at. So for example, the North American Indians have stories about great beasts and how all of these great beasts were taken out by thunderbirds. Now, initially, this story of these thunderbirds, etc., sounds insane, and I'll cover that in a second, but some of these stories actually represent things like dinosaurs. And of course, dinosaurs are supposed to exist, 63 plus million years ago, according to mainstream. Now, hold on. Before you think I'm going off the deep end and going schizo, I have nothing to say about the dinosaur subject. What's interesting about the dinosaur subject is that right now, as far as I'm concerned, scientifically, there is no good answer for any of that. So far as dating, so far as what they were, etc. Now you may laugh at that and you may think that's a ridiculous statement, but if you are 100% objective about the science that we understand now about dinosaurs and archaeology and geology and all of that stuff, you literally have no choice but to admit that we are in a position of ignorance. Alright, we just don't have answers to make the claims right now that mainstream holds high. They should not be making those claims. They're the crazy ones. They really should be saying, hey, look, everything that we're about to say about dinosaurs, for example, it's all conjecture. We have what we think is evidence that we have interpreted to get to this point, but that does not mean it's legit because obviously we don't have the true evidence to substantiate the point. But I digress. This is not about dinosaurs and stuff like that, so don't worry about it. I'm not getting all schizo in that respect. However, it does play a small part, so I just wanted to get it out there for all of you who do pay attention to this stuff to not write it off instantly. If you have ever had an inkling that you were onto something with respect to what you were finding in the fossil record versus what our ancients are talking about versus what happened to them, you might be right. So keep going with it. Because if you keep going with it, I think what you're going to find is that we not only don't have the story figured out at all with respect to mainstream science, is that there's actually even more going on than we could have ever initially imagined. And nowadays we live in a time to where we're actually starting to prove what may have happened and what may have created the fossils. And we have to talk about this because our ancient ancestors actually seem to have some sort of eyewitness testimony to what created a lot of the stuff that we find in the quote-unquote fossil record. And this is a problem for mainstream, because if we have our own ancient ancestors talking about how the fossil record may have been created, why we see the things we see in the strata that we find, that causes a serious problem, because if the mainstream is going to tell us that everything is millions and billions of years old, but then our ancestors are saying, no, this happened to us just a few thousand years ago, and here's how it happened. What do you do with that? Now the mainstream throws away our ancestors' history, right? Remember, our ancestors are always treated like cave dudes by the mainstream. The mainstream literally thinks that everybody was just eating bones and scratching their butts all day. It's unbelievable. And they think that everybody was doing that up until about like 200 years ago. How do you like that? And of course, they think everybody today is incredibly smart, or at least they think they're incredibly smart. All right, so let's cover the mainstream's answer for what they believe fossilization is. And I just want to throw this out there because I want to build a foundation for their side. If we're going to argue, if we're going to approach this scientifically, we got to give their side first. Whether we like it or not, we have to stay scientifically fair and accurate, even though the mainstream never does that. we will continue to take that approach. So what the mainstream considers fossilization is it's a complex process by which the remains of living organisms are essentially preserved and magically transformed into fossils over geological time periods, with geological time periods being, millions of years, which really should have been a problem in the first place for real scientists. This is mind-blowing that anybody bought into this aspect. All right, so anyway, so the animal dies, right? And this can be any organism, animal, whatever, followed by a quick burial. So it needs to, the animal that dies has to be buried extremely rapidly, right? Now, they claim this can happen in all kinds of ways, such as being covered by mud, silt, sand, volcanic ash, right? But the quick burial is critical to the theory. Why? Because they need to make sure that the animal does not decompose or decay. Now, decomposition and decay is the serious problem with the mainstream's version of fossilization. So now we pretend that somehow the animal was immediately buried, and that's possible. Something can happen, right? You can have a landslide or a mudslide, whatever. Stuff can happen. We get it. All right, so then it gets mineralized over time. Then it goes into lithification, and then it eventually goes uplift and exposure, where we eventually find the fossil, and then we find it. So that's a very short versions of what fossilization are, and I won't cover all the details because the reality is there's plenty of garbage videos out there for the mainstream that will absolutely show you what their crap is. Now, let's cover the problems with fossilization. So if all of that is true, if the mainstream is going to hold on to this, then they run into all kinds of problems. But for our purpose, our number one problem comes from: how did our ancient ancestors appear to know not only about a lot of these animals that we have found fossilized, that are supposed to be millions and tens of billions of years old, but how did they know what happened to them? The American Indians are very clear about what happened to all of the large beasts in North America. Now, what large beasts am I even talking about? Am I talking about dinosaurs? Not necessarily. I'm actually not talking about dinosaurs. But I can give you guys a little story really quick about a Native American story about what they actually say about the last dinosaur. Now, this is story I'll read really fast. It's a quick paragraph. It's just paraphrasing it. But this story I'm about to read to you is coined as what happened to the last dinosaur. But actually, I believe it's probably a story about what was going on between Mars and Venus during a very, very particular cataclysm. That said, this quick story actually illustrates one of the problems we have in ancient historical studies, because the outcome of this story, and this is what the Crow tribe actually says, this is from them, and what their thoughts on the story are basically, or at least this particular Crow, they say that this is where the last dinosaur died out on. There's a mythic tale told by the Crow and associated with Yellowstone Park and Yellowstone Lake, and what happened to the dinosaurs. A thunderbird grabbed a Crow Indian by his hair and took him to the Overlook Mountain on the southeast side of Yellowstone Lake and placed him in a nest there. The thunderbird told the Crow that he wanted him to help him fight against the giant water beast that lived in Yellowstone Lake, and which ate the thunderbird's young. The Crow built a large fire and heated many rocks and boiled much water. When the beast came out of the lake and climbed up the mountainside, the Indian pitched hot rocks and hot water into its mouth. Steam came out of the monster's mouth, and it tumbled down the mountainside and into the lake. Supposedly, this was the last dinosaur, and steam vents around Yellowstone Lake may be remnants of this event. A myth from Crow history. Now, this is a really quick version of it, and that's fine. But what I find very, very interesting about this story is several things. So the first story is we have the Crow talking about what may not necessarily be a reality relative to physical real animals. He may actually be referencing the various cosmological catastrophes that happened. And the Crow, at this point in time when he's recounting the story, he himself has long since lost any attachment to the cosmological realities of what that story was initially supposed to tell you. So for example, we have boiling water, hot rocks rolling down hills. I mean, that is all catastrophism stuff. We have, you know, a giant beast coming up from the lake. Yeah, sure, maybe that's a dinosaur or something. Or maybe it's one of the plasma events that they saw rising up from the horizon, and it seemed, you know, they just used it as a euphemism, as a descriptor that it rose out of the lake, and then one of the other planets, you know, ended up attacking it. Now, there's a lot of this stuff in American Indian mythology, and we'll go over that in a different show. But what I wanted to show you guys here was that there's even a certain period of time where even American Indians, for example, and this is all over the world, are talking about dinosaurs. I mean, they say it straight up. This was the last dinosaur. How the hell do they even know what dinosaurs are? Right, so your average paleontologist, whatever, you know, whatever, they're going to tell you, oh, they must have stumbled across bones. Interesting. So they stumbled across some of these bones, and they were able to make up all these real-life, scientifically based story from some bones. It's tough to believe. Now, I'm not going to go any further with the dinosaur part, because dinosaurs are a subject that I am now so lost on that I have nothing to say anymore about it. I actually might have some ideas, but that's neither here nor there. The important thing we want to talk about here is that the American Indians, and once again, ancient cultures all over the land, all over the world, but American Indians talk about a time a few thousand years ago where gigantic beasts still roamed North America. Just a few thousand years ago. And they also have the story about how they were wiped out. And a lot of these beasts that they're talking about are what we nowadays find in fossils. I want to read another little segment from American Antiquities book that shows you that even when the Europeans came over to North America, they were finding scattered all over North America just huge bones buried under feet or dozens of feet of dirt and rock, right? And nowadays the mainstream actually seems to call everything a fossil, by the way. I thought this was interesting because I never really realized it. But people will find a bone, like they'll find a whale bone of a whale that exists today, and they'll say it's a fossil. And it's like, what, that's a bone? That's not a fossil. Come to find out that the term fossil, the definition of fossil, has now been absolutely obfuscated to anything just kind of old, and they'll interchange it between, you know, like a regular bone, like here's a bone, or something that's like an imprint in a rock, you know, kind of what we're used to seeing as a fossil. You know, you see a fossil, you see some sort of like imprint of a dinosaur or a fish, and you think fossil. But no, man, people actually, scientists, mainstream now, they call bones that are just old fossils. So just a heads up on that. I know it's weird, but it's true. So just keep an eye on that. Anyway, so one of the things that American Indian tales talk about as well, not only were they around when the events happened and they got to see all of these huge prehistoric beasts taken out, you know, I'm talking about, you know, mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, all those giant animals that were here before the Mars or the Venus event happened that took everything out. Venus event probably being the #1 event that wiped them all out, and that's probably what they're talking about. And in fact, I think that's what that crow story is actually talking about. I think that crow story is discussing more than likely the Venus event when Venus was a comet and it passed by Earth. It could be the Mars-Venus event that happens later. That's possible. But that one, we'll get into that later. I think it may have been the Venus event. Anyway, one of the things that is not taught anywhere is that America was just covered in bones of large beasts. Not only was the east side of North America just covered in all kind of weird marine life bones, whale bones, shark bones, etc. And they're everywhere, right? When the settlers came over here, they were literally using whale bones as fences over there on the east side because they were everywhere. They were just free stuff. Here you go. The whale bones would literally get in the way of farmers as they were tilling their land. They would just stack them up into piles. And eventually they were all burned for fuel, etc. We have lost a ton of history, by the way. I mean, we have lost ungodly amounts of prehistoric history, or what we could call prehistoric history, in the past just like 300 years. It's ridiculous. A lot of this stuff is gone. It's a lot, yeah. So here's a quick account from American Antiquities that talks about all these bones that the Europeans were finding and studying. I mean, they're even documenting this back in the 1800s. All right. So they find drawings of ancient animals in a cave, and then what they do is they go and they try to compare them to the animal bones that they find laying all over North America or in certain parts of North America. In this cave, it appears there are sketched on the rock the figure of several animals now extinct, among which are 3, much resembling the elephant, the tail, and the tusks excepted. It would be passing the bounds of credulity to suppose the artists who delineated these figures would represent no less than 8 animals differing in their configuration one from the other, which had in reality no being such as these had ever been seen. We suppose the animals resembling the elephant to have been the mammoth, and that these ancients were well acquainted with the creature, or they could never have engraved it on the rock. Whoever has examined the skeleton of one of those animals, now in the Philadelphia Museum, will acknowledge the bones are equal to bars of brass or iron. So this is an important takeaway. These people back in the 1800s and earlier, they were finding these bones, studying them, and displaying them. They were all, they were just everywhere. They were already trying to figure out what was going on even back then. We have lost a lot of that nowadays. Its height over the shoulders, 11 feet, from the point of the nose to the end of the tail following the exterior or curve, is 21 feet. A single tooth weighs 4 pounds 10 ounces. The rib bones are 6 inches in width and thickness 3. The whole skeleton as it is, with the exception of a few bones, weighs 1,000 pounds. But how tremendous must that animal have been, to which the tooth weighing 25 pounds found in the earth at Cincinnati belonged more than 5 times the dimensions of one described above. Arguing from proportion, that is, if a tooth belonging to a skeleton weighing 1,000 pounds was found to be 4 pounds 10 ounces, a tooth weighing 25 pounds would give a skeleton of more than 5,000 pounds. And if the calculation to be carried forward in this sort of proportion, we shall produce an animal more than 40 feet high and nearly 100 in length, with a proportional thickness. Now, this is what these people are finding, and this is what the Native Americans are talking about. So they're literally claiming there's some really gigantic animals that were wandering around back in the day, and not too far back in the day. And I'm not just talking about only mammoths. They're talking about other animals too. Now, are they talking about like dinosaurs and stuff? I don't know. But there definitely seems to be some huge animals wandering around the Americas. Now, there's stories about this actually. The American Indians go on to say that they think that these animals that they were hunting here and there for a little bit, they were difficult to hunt, but they had pushed them north, up into the Canadian region, and there's all kinds of stories about that. Now, I know these examples are North America centric, but there's more examples all over the planet with everybody's ancient cultures. All right, so my point is right now, in living human memory, we have ancestors discussing not only having to deal with these creatures, but then watching them die, watching them getting taken out. Now, how do they describe these guys getting taken out? This is key. This is how fossilization may actually work. Now, I go back to the American Indian story really fast of Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds are a fascinating topic, and there's a lot to go over with these, but the reality is at the end of the day, one of the main points of a thunderbird is a thunderbolt. These are huge bolts of lightning that they are discussing, all right? They are discussing all kinds of insane plasma formations going on. And we know that if you're having 2 cometary bodies or two astronomical bodies who are charged, you'll get all kinds of electrical interference going on with one another. You will get the crazy electric storms. You will get the plasma formations in the sky, and there's all kinds of stuff that would be going on. So if you for example, if we take the Venus and the Earth cataclysm, right? That's a pretty serious cataclysm. But one of the main points of that cataclysm is that Earth and Venus are pelted with gigantic planetary-sized lightning strikes. Alright, so while those planets, for example, are trying to neutralize one another, you've got those surges going on. During these cataclysms, you have points of just absolute insane electrical activity slamming into the planet's crust. These kinds of electrical events may actually explain why we see the kind of fossilization that we do and why we see it where we see it. Now, the mainstream right now believes that over millions of years, somehow minerals magically will replace the little bits of bone and everything within an organic matter animal, and it'll do it perfectly without problem. Somehow that happens, and there's still no real scientific explanation. You may as well say magic. You may as well literally say that in the mainstream, the fossil is created by magic. Because how, over a process of millions of years, is an animal preserved and not decay, right? Just because you have mud flowing over an animal doesn't mean it's not going to decay. You have to somehow neutralize every single piece of life within that animal and then make sure it is somehow then separated from everything else, any other kind of predation, whether macroscopic or microscopic. The current mainstream model does not explain any of this. Like I said, you may as well just say it's magic if you believe in the millions of years old thing. We know that biological matter decays, and it decays relatively quickly. Right now, mainstream has a problem because not only do they have to figure out these fossils, but they're now finding fossils with soft tissue attached to it. I'm going to say that again. Somehow, like the T-Rex they say they found with soft tissue attached to it, 63 plus million years old. Come on. There's a point to where it's like, come on, man. Like, really, we have to move on from this. We've got to get away from the mainstream garbage. Because that's what that is. I mean, there's kind of a point where you got to look at it and you just want to start slapping people. You just want to grab them and you want to be like, you just want to slap the crap out of mainstream scientists nowadays. They're so Jews. All right. I mean, God. So what happens then? What's the alternative explanation? So then what else could explain fossilization? Well, as I said earlier and alluded to earlier, electricity. If we have unbelievable catastrophic events going on and it is generating ungodly amounts of plasma surges, electricity flow, etc., just planetary wide lightning bolts smashing into each other, smashing into the earth, vaporizing animals or charring animals, or converting animals into rock. Now this is where things get interesting and where we will start dealing with real science. Oh yeah, and one other point against the mainstream fossilization. Go look for a fossil that is in the midst of being fossilized right now. We should be able to find fossils right now that are in the middle of the process. See, what's fascinating is that doesn't exist in the mainstream story. Mainstream can't be like, oh yeah, here's a rock that contains the beginning of a fossil or a halfway fossilized, animal or plant. They don't have any of that. Apparently fossilization only took place back millions of years ago, but not anymore, conveniently enough. It just doesn't happen anymore. Oh, and another thing to remember about fossils. So remember, they find like full-bodied fossils inside of rock. Like they've cracked open rocks and there's like a full-bodied crab inside of a rock. Go check out pictures of the mammoth fossils, literally embedded in rock. Like, how are these animals that are not millions of years old, how are these animals embedded in solid rock? You have to somehow get these animals encased in rock. And by mainstream geological standards, that's supposed to take millions, tens of millions, and billions of years. But a lot of these animals are not millions or tens of millions of years old. They're only a few thousand, right? That's the problem. Finding a mammoth skull or skeleton in solid rock, that is a serious problem. And I mean a dead serious problem for mainstream. So somehow we have to find a process that instantly kills the animal, obviously, and it kills all of the little bacteria and other life forms that could predate on the animal. And then you have to lock the animal up. How do you do that? And it has to happen instantly. What do you do? Lightning can do that. Large bursts of lightning has the capability to transmute one element, such as something like carbon, and then you could transmute it into silicon. Low temperature electrical transmutation has already been observed in the lab. So essentially, if you throw electricity into the mix, you can create rock in a flash. This is just science. Now, if you are flash rocking things, so to speak, and there's animals in the way, guess what's going to happen? Those animals are also going to be caught up in the creation of the rock. So you might say, all right, fine, that explains one layer, but we find all of these animals under multiple layers. We find that there is a stratigraphical record here, and that's what mainstream geologists use to say to, fall behind for the millions and billions of years theory. But we don't need any of that. Check this out. So if we have one instance of an area being zapped really hard by a cosmic lightning bolt, and remember, all of our ancestors described these kinds of things happening. And like I just got done showing you guys earlier in this video, the Native Americans, for example, have stories about it all over the place. So you have a certain layer of animals that have now been zapped and flash frozen in rock. Then you have a huge wall of water rolling over the continent. And what is that wall bringing? Right? It's bringing tons of mud, debris, dirt, etc. And we know from other scientific experiments, and I've covered this in a geology video, that sedimentation does not take millions and billions of years to build up a stratigraphical record. You can have a stratigraphical layer column built up in just minutes. There is literally zero reason to think that it takes billions of years to build a stratigraphic column. We know for a fact that stuff can be built quickly in minutes, and that's exactly what would have happened during these cataclysms. Even more to the point, you might say now, well, wait a second. How does it get built that fast? I mean, we find smaller sediment underneath larger sediment. If you're talking about the action of water, shouldn't the action of water make it basically filter or sift out like the big stuff to the bottom and the little stuff to the top? Absolutely not. And we've already proven that scientifically in experiments. All right, that's been done for decades. We can now move on. So what we've just proven here, at least we have a good direction scientifically, is plants and animals can be fossilized instantly. All you need is a heavy lightning bolt, and to get the energy for that lightning bolt, if you have two planets interacting with one another, you'll get the electrical discharge you need. That electrical discharge smashes into an area. When it smashes into an area, it can convert one element into another, and that's why we find bones inside of rock. So basically we get animals rockified once lightning hits it. Pow, done, and you get it on the size of continents. So you'll get an entire stratigraphical layer of fossils from that time period. Then you have mountains of water carrying everything you can imagine rolling over all of this, right? And as all of that water that's being dragged across that part of the continent is rolling over it, you will create your new stratigraphy on top of the fossils, and you'll make that happen very quickly. Then all you need is a little bit of time and maybe some more thunderbolts, and then of course some earthquakes and stuff like that to shake things up and to fracture things, and suddenly you get our entire geological record. And it did not happen millions or billions of years ago. It happened only a few thousand years ago. Do you like that? It took me, what, 25 minutes to get to the point, and I could have just said it at the beginning. Anyway, I wanted to set everything up. So, when you're looking at your stratigraphy out there and you're taking fossils into account, instead of all of these animals being billions of years old, now suddenly maybe our ancestors had to deal with them. And that might start to explain why we see certain things that we see in the historical record. So if you find fossils, anachronistically popping up within your studies, don't just discard them. There might be more to it than you initially think.